We're so excited to be with all of you this morning. And I am an educator here at our museum at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and I am also a naturalist, which means that I am making observations and learning about the world all around me and asking all kinds of questions and trying to learn what is going on and what is changing. And part of what we study a lot here at the museum, one of the groups of animals is frogs and toads and salamanders, amphibians. And we also have lots of them all over the place in North Carolina. So it's really been something fun to learn about here at the museum and to share with all of you. So in our program today, our Frog Files program, we are going to talk about different kinds of amphibians, and I have a couple of frog ambassadors to share with you today. This picture here, this pine barrens tree frog, this is actually North Carolina's official state frog. So it's a pretty spectacular tree frog. It's not found everywhere in the state, just in a few localized areas. And we're going to talk a little bit about frog calls today too, because that is something that you and I can learn about and something that we can contribute to for science as well. There's some different citizen science projects that use sounds to help you learn about what is going on around you. So when we are talking about frogs, we are talking about a group of animals called amphibians. And frogs are the anurans. They are the amphibians without a tail. And in the world, there are 7,000 different species of frogs and toads. So there are a lot of them. And they live in all different kinds of places. Deserts, mountains, they can live in the jungle, they can live in the river, they can live in a swamp. There are even a few who can tolerate brackish water. So when salt and fresh water mix together, there are even a few who can tolerate those kinds of living conditions. So frogs are really well adapted to live in a variety of habitats and ecosystems. And there is a special branch of science that specializes in studying amphibians. Does anybody know what it is called? I'm going to give you a minute to think about it, and then I'm going to show you a picture for the word. So it is one of the ologies. So it is studying life and living creatures. So the study of amphibians and reptiles, actually, it is herpetology. So herpetology is focusing on this particular group of animals. And this is a picture of two of our herpetologists at the museum. So being a natural science museum, we do have a variety of science disciplines and lots of different types of research going on. And this is one particular branch that has been going on for a very long time. So our researchers are going all around the world and also focusing on North Carolina and the southeastern United States, trying to see what is out there, how are they related to each other, how are their populations changing over time, and what can we do to help them? So this is some of the things, some of the questions that our researchers are asking. So we're going to talk about biggest and smallest, because that's always kind of a fun fact to share. The smallest frog right now, so this is sitting on a United States dime, and it's about the size of a housefly, and it's the Paedophryn swiftorum, and it is found in Papua New Guinea. So this is about the smallest that you can get as a frog. So think of a fly zooming around your head, and there's a little frog out there that is that tiny. And then in North America, we have the little grass frog. That's our smallest frog. And then in the world, you have the Goliath frog found in the central part of the continent of Africa. And it can be almost 5 pounds in weight. It's huge. It can be longer than a ruler from head stretched out from its head to its cloaca. So really stretched out, it can be huge. And then in North America, we have the bullfrog. That is our largest frog species. And something that I thought was really fun, and it's always fun to see what we all share in common. And so we were talking about some exotic species and some North American species. And you and I, pretty much, the bullfrog can be found in all of the places that we are living, in all of our classrooms today, and where I am today in North Carolina as well. All right, so what do we have in common with frogs and toads? What do we have in common? How about our skeletons, right? We are all vertebrate animals. We all have a backbone. So that's kind of the easiest similarity that you could start with. So here is our mounted skeleton of a bullfrog. And I'm going to point out some of the interesting features on the skeleton. So thinking of how our human skeletons are put together compared to a bullfrog, you might notice this central column of bones right here. This is the vertebrae column. We have 33 bones here. Frogs and toads don't have any more than 10. So they have a much more shortened vertebrae column. And they're also missing something on the sides here that you and I have that's wrapped around our middle. They don't have any ribs. They also have this really elongated hip bone. And this is a bullfrog, of course. So this is a larger skeleton. Their hands and toes are different shapes compared to our own. And if I were to show you a skull, which I may pull out a little bit later, you will see that they don't have teeth like us, but they do have a version of little teeth on the tops of their jaw that I can show you a little bit later. Other things that they have in common with us. Their body systems. So they have circulatory systems and digestive systems. They have a nervous system. So they do have a brain, and they do have a heart, and they have a stomach and intestines. So when we are talking about what we have in common with other animals, we have these basic body functions, and we also have basic needs. So that's my next question for you. When we're talking about animals and the places that they live, what do we all need to survive? So we need food, right? So we need food to help our bodies be strong and to grow. We need clean water so that we can be strong and be growing and be healthy. And this is the same for frogs and toads and other animals out in the wild. We need space. So we need the right kinds of space to be able to move safely between our home and our school and the places that we like to visit. This is the same for frogs and toads too. And we also need shelter, right? So we need shelter to protect ourselves from the elements and from, if we live with really big wild animals and we were camping, we might need to be having some kinds of shelter protect us from some things. If you're a frog or a toad, you need shelter from predators. You need shelter from the environment and from the weather conditions as well. So body systems, skeletons, and our needs for survival are very similar. Now, what is different? Because sometimes it's easier to think of differences than things that you share in common. But with frogs and toads, the differences are also really fun. So think of your tongue, right? What we use our tongue for, we can stick it out. We use it for tasting, for eating, and swallowing, and speaking. Frogs and toads are using their tongues to help them catch their food. And here's a quick little video clip that shows you just how strong and powerful and sticky the tongues of some types of frogs can be. And when you're thinking about how fast a frog's tongue comes out, the way that their eyes are and the way their eyes respond to light and movement, as soon as the eyes detect changes in light, the tongue comes out. So it's a really quick response time. So here's a little video that shows you this. Yeah. In slow motion, of course. That was a species of horned frog. We're going to watch another video clip really quick that shows you the horned frog swallowing. So everybody in your class, take a moment and swallow. Put your hand right here and feel your mouth, feel your throat moving when you swallow, right? Our tongue and the muscles in our throat are helping us push our saliva down and push our food down. Frogs and toads do it a little bit differently. Think about in their skull and how much space in their head their eyes take up. So their eyes are helping them to see the movement around them and catch their food. Their eyes have a very interesting function as well. And so we're going to watch this video. It's an X-ray video that shows you what the eyes of a frog or toad do.
As a frog swallows, it pulls its bulging eyes downwards so that they help to push the food down its throat.
That's definitely pretty different than how you and I are eating and swallowing our food, right? So that's an interesting adaptation for eating food and for helping them to grow much bigger. Something else, so that's one adaptation we can talk about. Another adaptation I wanted to talk about is how they are going about their daily lives and blending in or not. And also we are going to talk about the wood frog in a moment as well. So an example of an adaptation for surviving in your environment would be the coloration on your body and the textures on your body. And so here's a really great local example of camouflage. This is a gray tree frog, and these are found all around. Yeah, so you have these all the way up into Canada. And here in North Carolina, come summertime, this is the sound of summer where I live when it's about to rain. And they can really get loud. You almost feel like you live in a tropical rainforest. But the gray tree frog is really well adapted for camouflage on the tree trunks and with the lichen and the moss growing all around them. And they can vary their colors slightly depending on what they are sitting on top of. So this is one really great example of camouflage. There's another great example of camouflage, but it's not camouflage. It's not called camouflage. It's coloration, that instead of hiding, you can advertise. So this is called warning coloration, aposematic coloration. Does anybody know what this frog is? I bet you guys have heard of these kinds of frogs before. If I show you this type of picture, you probably have seen these frogs before or heard of them. These are the poison frogs, the poison dart frogs. So they don't need to camouflage and hide in their surroundings. They are extremely toxic. And so they have bright colors that advertise their ability to defend themselves with these toxins. And so they don't need to hide. So there's hiding with camouflage, and then there are warning colors. Something else that frogs and toads are able to do is produce poison in special poison glands. So this is the American toad, and this is going to be our first frog that we will get to meet today. So I'm going to pull out our American toad. This is our frog ambassador for our day, our connection today. And because we are moving around so much and we visit with so many people, when we are handling our frog ambassadors, we usually wear these gloves so that we don't get them sick. Amphibians, that's something we didn't spend too much time talking about earlier. Amphibians have very permeable skin. So they don't have scaly skin like reptiles. They don't have scales. Their skin is very breathable and can easily absorb water and other chemicals. So the gloves are for the amphibian to keep it safe. So looking down into our American toad, here is our really great, I might turn my container around a little bit. Here's our really great North American example for camouflage. This is our little frog of the forest. They spend a lot of their time hopping around in the woods where they live. So they can be hiding under logs, hiding under rocks. They hide in the leaf litter. And they eat lots of different kinds of insects that are living on the ground with them. So something to point out about toads are these. So we were saying that there is camouflage for hiding. If the hiding doesn't work, they are able to produce toxins, and he's going to go into his little hidey box. This is why shelter is important, right? So this would be something that we provide in captivity to make the toad feel safer and to mimic some of the things that they would have in the wild. I'm going to move it out of the way really quick so we can see it. So toads have parotoid glands, which are these little glands right here, and they can produce a really milky substance. Their poison is very like milky and white looking, and it makes them distasteful. So our North American toads, for the most part, taste bad, and animals learn to leave them alone. It's not harmful to you and I. There are some toads that are so poisonous that if an animal were to bite it, they would die. And one example of those kinds of toads would be a cane toad. So you could look that up later on if you wanted to learn more about the cane toad. But our woodland toads here, their toxins are more meant to protect them and make them taste bad to other creatures. And it's doing really great toad behavior of short little hops. And so we talk about frogs and toads, and in science and how we are telling animals apart in taxonomy, we don't necessarily think about frogs or toads as their official scientific vocabulary or terminology, but it's something that you and I talk a lot about just in trying to figure out how things are similar and different to each other. So toads are typically having this bumpy skin and these short little legs for hopping. And he's going to go back into his little hidey hole. So with talking about our toad, something that's fun to talk about now is how frogs and toads are communicating with each other. So you and I are using words. We can sing. We make a huge variety of sound as mammals. Frogs and toads are primarily singing during the breeding season. And this is the part where you and I can learn their calls, and we can help contribute to different science projects like something called Frog Watch, where you can catalog and keep track of the different frogs and toads that are around the places that you live. So frogs and toads are singing to gather everybody to the meeting place. What is a meeting place for a frog or a toad, you might say? Where would they be meeting? So depending on the frog or toad, it could be a river, it could be a stream or a creek or a pond. It could even be a puddle. So say there is an area on the side of the road that collects water in the wintertime, but in the summertime, you would never know that it's there. You and I might just think of it as a puddle, but to some frogs and toads, that is the meeting place. It's a vernal pool. It's a temporary seasonal pool of water that comes and goes, but this is a breeding place for some amphibians, salamanders as well. So they get everybody together by singing. So I'm gonna play the song of one of the frogs that we have here a lot that's just starting to sing this time of year. So in North Carolina, yesterday it was almost 70 degrees in the middle of January. Tomorrow, I think it's gonna be like 45 degrees, a high of 45 degrees. So our weather is highly variable here. So in February, end of January, February, a lot of our amphibians are actually on the move and moving to their breeding pools. And so we're starting to hear frogs and toads sing. And one of the frogs or toads that we hear singing is this one. And this is one that you all have too, up in Canada and all the way up north. This is a cricket frog. So cricket frogs, one of the ways that we try to tell frogs and toads apart is that we are thinking of things that they sound like that we recognize. So if you could imagine picking up two pebbles or two rocks and clicking them together, or two pennies, that's kind of what cricket frogs sound like. Another sound that you could hear is the sound of the toad that we just met, the American toad. And so I'm going to have that sound play for you in just a moment. It almost kind of sounds like an insect, this really high-pitched trilling sound. So one of the really fun, silly things that we can all try together is to try and mimic the sounds of frogs or toads. And so I was told that I wouldn't want a video of myself in perpetuity of me doing this, but I think it's too much fun to pass up. So I'm gonna show you all two ways that you can mimic the sounds of frogs, okay? The first sound is gonna be the American toad that we just heard. And the way that you do this is that you take a deep breath. So everybody take a deep breath. And then when you let out the air, you're humming and you're making your lips go. Okay, ready? So I'm gonna show you and then you can all try. And you can make your own frog chorus in your classroom. So on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. So you may, if you didn't do that in your classroom, now you could do it if you wanted. And then the other really silly sound that we can do is for green tree frogs. When all of them get together, they say something that sounds like, hey, baby. And so first, we'll play the regular sound of the green tree frog. So here's the green tree frog playing. Okay. And we don't have the sound of the chorus. So you all should look this up afterwards because it's really funny. But from far away, using your imagination, we like to joke that they are saying, hey, baby, hey, baby, hey, baby. So if you pinched your nose and you said, hey, baby, and you all said it at the same time, now I can imagine the sound of green tree frogs everywhere saying, hey, baby, in their breeding chorus. Okay, so 2 fun sounds that maybe you will remember later on, or 3 fun sounds that maybe you will remember later on. All of this leads to babies, eggs. So if you are hearing all of these frogs and toads singing, the next thing that you should be doing is go investigate and see if you can observe any eggs that have been left behind. And you might see eggs like this. These would be toad eggs. So they're in a string. Or you might see a really big glob of eggs, like from a bullfrog or a green frog, and they're in this big jelly blob. And we use the word gelatinous to describe amphibian eggs. So they are protected. Each little black dot is what is going to hatch into the tadpole. And each of those dots is surrounded by this jelly substance that protects the eggs from the molds that are growing in the water that might try to invade and just spread out and grow onto the little babies that are trying to develop. So the jello, that substance, helps protect the eggs that are developing. And when they hatch out, they look like little round fish, right? But they aren't fish. They have a tail, and they do have gills. They are breathing like a fish. They have this little scraping mouth that they're using to scrape off algae and other plant material. Most of them are herbivores, so they're eating plant material in the water where they are developing. But this is our next really fun, there's always exceptions to the rule in nature, right? We like to say, never say always, because there's always going to be rule breakers in the natural world. These are rules that humans make up, right? Animals and plants don't follow our rules. So this next animal that we're going to meet, instead of being an herbivore with this little scraping mouth, this animal is a filter feeder. So it is opening up its mouth really wide and sucking in all of the water and getting the little particles, and that is how it is eating. And so the next animal that we are going to meet today looks like this, and it's called an African clawed frog. So I'm going to take out our African clawed frog to share with you next. That's our next animal ambassador. And here it is. And you might notice you see my picture here next to me with all of the colors intended in nature for blending into your environment. And then you have this frog here who has no colors and is an albino African clawed frog. And because of some of its interesting adaptations, clawed frogs have been used a lot in scientific research, just to see how they are developing and changing and how they're growing. So my African clawed frog ambassador has no coloration. So when you are thinking of frogs and toads, now we saw the short frog with the bumpy skin and the parotid glands hopping along on the ground. This is primarily an aquatic frog, and it is from Africa originally. But if you look at this map here, you'll see that there are yellow dots now in lots of other places in the world. So in some parts of the world, this is now a naturalized invasive species. And that's the next thing. So you and I, we talked about learning frog calls and contributing to science and helping us figure out what is there and how things are changing around us. The other thing that you and I can do as ambassadors for nature and ambassadors for the natural world is be responsible pet owners. So if you decide that you really, really want this super cool exotic animal, make sure that it was bred in captivity and make sure that you keep it for its whole life. You never want to release it into the wild afterwards. That's how the African clawed frog got to all the places that you saw on the map. Has anybody spotted the little claw on its foot yet while it's swimming around? It's really tiny. I think if we come from the side view here, I can point it with my finger. Right here. They're like two little black dots on their back feet. Now you can kind of see them. And they use the claws for shredding their food because of the way that they're suctioning the food into their mouths. And interestingly enough, compared to other frogs and toads, they don't really make any sounds. The male can make a couple of like chirping sounds, but they don't have a vocal sac like other frogs and toads do. So that is very different. So those are our two frog ambassadors, the African clawed frog and the American toad. So one exotic species and one North American species. And again, there's 7,000 frogs and toads that can be found all around the world. And the hot spot of diversity, where we find the most different kinds of frogs and toads, is in the tropics. So near the equator and tropical regions around the world is where the biggest variety of species can be found.